The Pantera is the perfect blend, American muscle and Italian style. But I want to let you in on a little secret. This body was actually designed by an American. Hi there, Rick DeBrule, another chapter in the automotive evolution here once again at the Martin Auto Museum, a great collection of more than 170 cars here in Phoenix, Arizona. Plenty of American iron, as you can see scattered throughout here. But we also have some, well, foreign stuff like this MGB GT behind me. And then we have this car right here, a Pantera, which is it American? Is it foreign? Well, it's the perfect blend of both, that some might say. But before we get to this car, make sure you like and subscribe. And don't forget, if you have any questions or comments, make sure you include them down below. I want to hear what you have to think. Tell me what I got right and, well, what I might have gotten wrong. The Pantera, of course, is such a great story. You know, Ford, fresh off its victory from Le Mans in 1966, 67, 68, and 69, well, they wanted to have a little more exotic flavor to their lineup as well. Remember the attempt to buy Ferrari that didn't go so well? So they got together with a smaller manufacturer in Italy, De Tomaso. Now, De Tomaso had built a couple of cars before. The most significant before this one was the Mangusta. And they looked at the Mangusta and thought, we need something just a little more, well, sophisticated than that. Something for the American taste. And so they decided to come up with a car that would have that Italian styling and have an American engine in it. And they went to a company called Ghia to do the styling for this. And it just so happened that there was a young man working at Ghia who happened to be an American. His name was Tom Charta, and he was the son of John Charta. John Charta was the guy who, well, you might know one car in particular, very famous, that he designed for Detroit, the Lincoln Zephyr. So Tom Charta was now working his way up through the ranks of great designers. He was working at Ghia at the time, and he was tasked with coming up with a body, a style, that they thought that the Americans might like. And this is exactly what he came up with. Taking the concept of the Mangusta, you know, this slope, low styling, and taking it up to the next level. Now, the Pantera itself was actually introduced into the United States in 1970. And interestingly enough, it was sold at Lincoln Mercury dealers, if you can imagine that. Because once again, it was supposed to be a little more upscale. To be honest with you, I'm not sure the Lincoln dealers really knew what to do with this. But here's the great thing. The price on this car, I think it was $9,800 when they first introduced it. What a screaming deal for all of the spectacular styling. And what you essentially had was a European supercar with a significantly less expensive price. And you had an American engine in the back that I'll talk about in just a moment that was significantly easier to work on than any of the stuff you were going to get out of those Italian manufacturers. So once again, was this the perfect blend? American engine, American performance, and Italian styling? I think there's a good case to be made for that. Tom Charta had very specific goals as he was designing the Pantera. Remember, this was an evolution from the Mangusta, but he needed to make it, well, just a little bit better in every way. To start with, it needed to have more room, so the roof of this car is a little bit taller than the Mangusta. And as part of that, the windshield, which was pretty steep angle in the Mangusta, was actually straightened up just a little bit more, so you could have a little bit more room inside for those American drivers. Now, one of the things he wanted to do was he wanted to give this an almost animalistic look and a style. He wanted it to look like it was an animal leaning forward on its haunches, getting ready to strike, and that's exactly what they came up with. He also wanted to make sure that it had a style that showed where the engine was. No, it was not up front, it was in the back, and that was that big area back there with the vents coming in through the side, the airflow in through the side to make it appear as if that is exactly where the engine is, because that is where the engine was going to be. By the way, here at the museum, this one, as you can see, has Pantera GTS or GT5. I think that's GTS logos on the side. This one's been made up to look like a GT5, and you can tell with this modern, or more modern wing, I should say, something that would not have been included on this 1973 model, which is an L version for Lusso or luxury. There you can see they've changed the badging here on the back. So once again, changing the styling when it was purchased by the museum, this is what they got. So we get a little bit of the Pantera styling with some adventurous stuff put on. Some people are lukewarm about those wings. Other people just love them. By the way, in the back, of course, that is that 351 Cleveland engine. We'll talk about that in just a moment. It's got a weight distribution of 60-40. 60% of the weight is on the back, just 40% on the front, which makes it a little tricky in the handling department. But in terms of what they were trying to achieve from a styling perspective, think about this. You could walk into a Lincoln Mercury dealer and buy an exotic Italian car. Meet the star of the show when it comes to the Pantera. Yeah, the design, the beauty of the outside is great, but this is what this car was all about. Putting this Ford engine into this Italian body. And in this case, it's a 351 cubic inch Cleveland engine. Now back then they actually had two different 351s. They had the 351 Windsor and the 351 Cleveland. Cleveland, of course, built in the Cleveland plant. The 351 Windsor was ultimately an evolution from the 289 and the 302 blocks. The 351 Cleveland, well, that was what they called the $100 million design aided by computers. It had a lower and wider block. It had compound canted valves, large heads, had better airflow for improved cooling, lightweight pistons, better valve clearance, had a 5-bolt main bearing crank that was stronger and lighter than previous versions. This was all about performance. This was putting a package into the back of this car that made it, well, an American performance machine. I've always loved the design of the engine compartment back here because it's so clean. Now I see some that are much more polished off in terms of panels that they put in here, but this one shows everything off. See how it connects up to that ZF transaxle right there, that racing style transaxle. Now, when you were inside, yeah, it was pretty noisy because this engine was right here, right next to where you are. But this is what this car was all about. Combining this American simple performance. I mean, think about this. You could actually get this probably tuned up at a tune-up master in your day. But here it was, inside the skin of an exotic Italian car. What a combination. Well, it's pretty rough around the edges when it first came out, with so many people having to do so many fixes on them to get them up to really the kind of standard that Americans were expecting. By the time this car comes out in 1973, they'd actually made a number of improvements, and Ford also had gotten more involved in making sure the quality control was a lot better. Now, here at the Martin Museum, some of the cars are parked a little close together. And that's the case we have right here, this MGB GT right next door to it. So I can't open the door all the way, so getting in is a little more complicated than normal. But to be honest with you, I was kind of thinking this is what it would be like if you were in a parking lot and the car next to you was parked right next to you. I mean, there's actually room, but still. Now, the nice thing about the Pantera is this door will actually open very wide, and as a result, it's not that difficult to get in and out once you can get down to the proper level. But in a parking lot situation where you can't open the door all the way, well, you saw what it was like. Not easy to get in and out. Now, once you're in, boy, it pretty much just fits you like a glove. Of course, it has one unique aspect to the way you drive it, which is your feet are slightly off to the side. The accelerator and the brake and the clutch are just angled very slightly to the right. It's similar to some of the other supercars, Countach, some of those cars like that were made during that era, because what they're doing is they're moving you so far forward that the left front wheel is intruding back inside, and so to get the proper position, you have to be tilted ever so slightly to the right to make sure you work your way in. Now, once you're in, everything is perfectly where you want it to be, but one of the other things that's right here is the engine. I mean, I'm sitting here in the car and I can look back and I can see the valve covers, I can see the carburation, I can see everything for the engine right there. And one of the downsides is you're also hearing all the sound and all the noise and the vibration from all that. They say it has very precise steering, although you have to be careful because it can oversteer pretty abruptly when you're, lifting the throttle in a turn, so you have to be pretty careful of that. When you're looking out back, it's pretty restricted viewing because, you've got these massive, we'll call them sailplanes in the back that are restricting vision. You got little tiny mirrors off to the side. You're spending most of your time looking forward. And the nice thing is, well, the hood slopes so quickly forward that you don't have a lot of overhang. You pretty much know where everything is up front. It's actually relatively roomy. I'm 6 feet tall. Now, my head is just about touching the ceiling right here. I don't know that I'd want to be much taller than 6 feet tall and get in here, but all things considered, it's not bad. All right, a lot of famous people have owned these things, but there's one particular celebrity who's known for, let's say, having a very bad day with his Pantera. And that's Elvis Presley. As the story goes, he couldn't get his Pantera to start. So he actually took a gun, his .38, and shot the car because it wouldn't work. Well, that's pretty legendary. Now this is officially the storage space for the Pantera. As you can see, there's not a lot up here. Maybe a small overnight bag, not much else. I've seen plenty of people though convert that back area where there's so much space to more storage, although anything you're going to put back there, you want to make sure you don't, have to worry about it warming and cooking because it'll get plenty warm back there. The radiator is up front. You can see it right here. That's what's cooling the engine. It's a traditional style with the tubing going back to provide all of the cooling water for the engine. But that's what's up front, and that's what gives it just a little bit of weight over the front wheels. I sometimes wonder what was Ford's long-term plan for De Tomaso and the Pantera. I mean, it arrived here in 1971, and if you go back and read a lot of the stories from back then, this car had an awful lot of problems. There were several recalls associated with it, everything from the fuel tank to the rear suspension. Some people called it little more than a kit car, and it was barely finished. As time went along, of course, it got better and better. In fact, when the 1973 model came out, this Lusso version, it had improved significantly, but it was still pretty rough around the edges. On the other hand, those people who knew Italian cars, were buying the Ferraris and Lamborghinis of the day, were saying, well, that's kind of what we're used to. We're used to something that's just a little bit rough around the edges. But by 1975, things came to an end. The marriage between De Tomaso and Ford was over, and as a result, well, they stopped having Lincoln Mercury Panteras. But guess what? De Tomaso continued to build the Pantera really for quite some time. They went up through various versions, the GT5, the GT5S. They became a little bigger. Some people would say a little bit fatter, little pieces added to it as things went along. But they continued to build them. I think before it was all said and done, they built more than 7,000 Panteras. Initially, they were using the 351 cubic inch Cleveland engine, but the United States stopped producing those at a certain point in time. So actually, De Tomaso had to source those out of Australia, if you can imagine that, getting the 351, which was where it was built. Eventually, though, everything comes to an end, and the De Tomaso Pantera came to an end as well. But think about it. When this car came out in 1973, you could walk into a Lincoln Mercury dealership and look at this thing and consider buying it. Now, in reality, this is what we call a halo car. This is the kind of car that got you into the dealership. You probably weren't going to walk away with this. What you were going to do was you were going to buy a Cougar, or you might just, buy something else that you thought was cool. But what they were hoping to do was make, Ford, and in particular Lincoln Mercury, seem cool, because this was the brethren. This was the car that was on the showroom floor as well. It was expensive. I think it was like $3,000 more than a Corvette in its day, but it was a lot less expensive than if you were going to pay for a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. So once again, you had that spectacular Italian/American style, as we know from Tom Charta. We had that 351 cubic inch engine in the back pumping out American horsepower. We had all that great performance, and you could buy it in a Lincoln Mercury dealer. Well, this was a great chapter in the automotive evolution.